Hello. Welcome to the CIPP Unofficial Study Guide, providing an overview of European Union institutions. We will also be covering a couple of other institutions you need to know. Let's get started. Here are the main institutions we will be looking at. Council of the European Union, European Commission, European Parliament, European Council, Court of Justice of the European Union, European Central Bank, and the Court of Auditors. Let's start with the three main institutions, which are the Council of the European Union, the European Commission, and the European Parliament. The European Commission, the one in the middle, is the executive branch of the EU. Its responsibilities are to propose legislation, implement decisions, uphold EU treaties and manage day-to-day business. The European Commission represents the interests of the Union as a whole. There are two legislative branches, the Council of the European Union and the European Parliament. The Council of the European Union, also referred to as the Council, serves to amend and approve, or disapprove of proposals from the executive branch, the European Commission. It shares equal legislative and budgetary powers with the European Parliament. Although, it has greater control over intergovernmental areas of the EU, such as foreign policy. This branch represents the governments of the individual member countries. The European Parliament is the other legislative branch of the EU. This branch represents the EU's citizens and is directly elected by them. Similar to the Council, the EU Parliament adopts laws. The executive branch, the European Commission, is accountable to the European Parliament. Remember, the executive branch, the European Commission, represents the Union. The Council represents individual member countries. Think Council of Countries, to help remember their representation. The European Parliament represents the EU citizens, and are elected like other parliamentarian countries. Let's look at four other institutions of the European Union. They are, the European Council, Court of Justice, Central Bank, and the Court of Auditors. The European Council, not to be confused with the Council of the European Union, is a collective body that defines the EU's overall political direction and priorities. It consists of heads of state or government of the EU member states, and the President of the European Council, and President of the European Commission. It has no powers to pass laws. It represents the highest level of political cooperation between EU countries. The Court of Justice is the judicial branch of the European Union. The Court of Justice of the European Union, CJU, interprets EU law to make sure it is applied in the same way in all EU countries, and settles legal disputes between national governments and EU institutions. It can also, in certain circumstances, be used by individuals, companies or organizations to take action against an EU institution, if they feel it has somehow infringed their rights. It consists of two separate courts, the Court of Justice and the General Court, which are. The Court of Justice deals with requests for preliminary rulings from national courts, certain actions for annulment, and appeals. The General Court rules on actions for annulment brought by individuals, companies and, in some cases, EU governments. In practice, this means that this court deals mainly with competition law, state aid, trade, agriculture, trademarks. There is also the Central Bank, which administers monetary policy within the Eurozone, and the Court of Auditors, which is a professional external investigatory and audit agency. Here is an overview of the roles of the main EU institutions. The European Commission proposes legislation to the European Parliament and Council of the European Union. The two legislative branches approve, amend, or disapprove of the legislation. If approved, the legislation is implemented by the European Commission, and the Court of Justice arbitrates legislations. There are two other roles to remember. The Council of the European Union proposes commissioners, and then the European Council appoints the commissioners, once approved by the European Parliament. The European Parliament supervises, that is, holds accountable, the European Commission. The European Parliament approves appointments for commissioners made by the Council. A quick note on what it takes to pass legislation. The European Parliament requires a simple majority to pass, which is 50% or greater. The Council, however, requires double majority, which is greater than or equal to 55% of deputies of governments representing greater than or equal to 65% representation of EU citizens. To block legislation, the Council needs greater than or equal to 4% of governments to be against the proposal. Let's go through each institution and take a closer look. The European Commission is the executive branch of the European Union. It proposes legislation and implements legislation that is passed by the Council and Parliament. They uphold EU treaties and manage day-to-day business. The European Commission operates as a cabinet government, with 27 members of the Commission, informally known as commissioners. There is one member per member state, but members are bound by their oath of office to represent the general interest of the EU as a whole rather than their home state. One of the 27 is the Commission President, proposed by the European Council and elected by the European Parliament. The Council of the European Union then nominates the other members of the Commission in agreement with the nominated President, and the 27 members as a single body are then subject to a vote of approval by the European Parliament. The term Commission is variously used, either in the narrow sense of the 27-member College of Commissioners, or College, or to also include the administrative body of about 32,000 European civil servants who are split into departments called Directorates General and Services. The procedural languages of the Commission are English, French, and German. The members of the Commission and their cabinets, immediate teams, are based in the Berlaymont building in Brussels. The Council of the European Union, also known as the Council, is part of the legislative branch, along with the Parliament. The Council serves to amend, approve, or disapprove proposals from the EU. They propose commissioners for the European Commission, which are approved by the Parliament. They share budgetary powers with Parliament and have greater control over intergovernmental areas of the EU, such as foreign policy. The Council of the European Union and the European Council are the only EU institutions that are explicitly intergovernmental, that is forums whose attendees express and represent the position of their member states' executive, be they ambassadors, ministers or heads of state or government. As mentioned on the previous slide, the European Parliament is one of two legislative branches. The Parliament serves to amend, approve, or disapprove proposals from the EU Commission. They share equal legislative and budgetary powers with the Council. Although the European Parliament has legislative power, as does the Council, it does not formally possess legislative initiative, which is the prerogative of the European Commission, as most national parliaments of European Union member states do. The European Commission, the executive body of the EU, it exercises executive powers, but no legislative ones other than legislative initiative, is accountable to Parliament. In particular, Parliament can decide whether or not to approve the European Council's nominee for the President of the Commission, and it is further tasked with approving, or rejecting, the appointment of the Commission as a whole. It can subsequently force the Commission as a body to resign by adopting a motion of censure. While we have already reviewed this earlier, it is worth going over again. The Court of Justice is the judicial branch of the European Union. The Court of Justice of the European Union, CJU, interprets EU law to make sure it is applied in the same way in all EU countries, and settles legal disputes between national governments and EU institutions. It can also, in certain circumstances, be used by individuals, companies or organizations to take action against an EU institution, if they feel it has somehow infringed their rights. It consists of two separate courts, the Court of Justice and the General Court, which are. The Court of Justice deals with requests for preliminary rulings from national courts, certain actions for annulment, and appeals. The General Court rules on actions for annulment brought by individuals, companies and, in some cases, EU governments. In practice, this means that this court deals mainly with competition law, state aid, trade, agriculture, trademarks. Council. There are way too many councils. Let's look at three related to the EU. They are the Council of the European Union, European Council, and the Council of Europe. We have talked about the Council of the European Union, which is also known as simply, the Council, which is one of two legislative bodies of the EU. The European Council defines the European Union's overall political direction and priorities. It consists of heads of state or government from EU member states. The Council of Europe is distinct from the 27-nation European Union, although it is sometimes confused with it, partly because the EU has adopted the original European flag which was created by the Council of Europe in 1955, as well as the European anthem. No country has ever joined the EU without first belonging to the Council of Europe. Unlike the EU, the Council of Europe cannot make binding laws, but it does have the power to enforce select international agreements reached by European states on various topics. The best-known body of the Council of Europe is the European Court of Human Rights, which enforces the European Convention on Human Rights. At the end of this presentation, we will cover some memory tips on how to keep this all straight. The European Court of Human Rights is a regional human rights judicial body based in Strasbourg, France, created under the auspices of the Council of Europe. The court began operating in 1959 and has delivered more than 10,000 judgments regarding alleged violations of the European Convention on Human Rights. In 1998, the European human rights system was reformed to eliminate the European Commission of Human Rights, which previously decided the admissibility of complaints, oversaw friendly settlements, and referred some cases to the court, in a manner similar to the current Inter-American system. Now, individual victims may submit their complaints directly to the European Court of Human Rights. The European Court, or Strasbourg Court as it is often called, serves a complementary role to that of the European Committee of Social Rights, which oversees European states' respect for social and economic rights. The court has jurisdiction to decide complaints, applications, submitted by individuals and states concerning violations of the Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, commonly referred to as the European Convention on Human Rights, which principally concerns civil and political rights. It cannot take up a case on its own initiative. Notably, the person, group or non-governmental organization submitting the complaint, the applicant, does not have to be a citizen of a state party. However, complaints submitted to the court must concern violations of the convention allegedly committed by a state party to the convention, and that directly and significantly affected the applicant. As of November 2018, there are 47 state parties to the convention. These include the member states of the Council of Europe, and of the European Union. Some of these states have also ratified one or more of the additional protocols to the convention, which protect additional rights. Okay, now for some cheesy memory tips. Let's look at the three councils to make sure we get them right. First, the Council of the European Union has the abbreviation, CEU. Remember, the Council was involved with the GDPR. So to help you remember this, think CEU, as in Continuing Education Unit, and that this is directly related to your learning for this course. Second, Council of Europe has the abbreviation, CE Remember, Common Era, which will remind you that this had more of a historical role. And finally, the European Council has the abbreviation EC. Remember, executives that congregate, to help you out with that one. You can also remember executives direct, because they set the political direction. Okay, final cheesy memory tip. Remember this. EC proposes. P. and CEU opposes. EC rewrites. P. and CEU says all right. Now it is law. For what it is worth, there it is. May not be much, but there it is. Well, that's a wrap. Since this is free, there is no guarantee. If you find an error, mention it in the comments below. Complaints? Remember, this is free. Keep them to yourself. Goodbye.